Hello friend, I am Rahat Hassan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Before going to start this particular lecture, uh, I once again would like to welcome all of you in this online course on international relation in a changing world. So friends, today we will discuss some another important topics in the discipline of political science or in the discipline of international relation or world politics. These concepts are also called as in the discipline of international relations that the very core or the very important or the primary concepts in the discipline of international relations. So friends, in the past lectures or the previous lecture rather, we discussed about the meaning of international relations, scope of international relations, nature and other things that are related to the basic understanding about the discipline of international relations. Friends, in that sense, there are certain important concepts that we need to know or we need to understand that, and because these concepts are considered very primary in nature and very core in nature. So these concepts are, for example, the concept of national interest, concept of national power, collective security, balance of power. So these sort of concepts, these are very basic, very fundamental in nature, so far as to understand or so far as to discuss the discipline of international relations or world politics. So basically these are the concepts which are fundamental in nature, in a sense that the in international relations we discuss, or the international relation as a discipline, it refer a kind of interactions among the state. So the state interactions, and in addition to that there are many other international actors also. For example, international organization, for example international non-governmental organizations as well, multinational company and some other non-state actors as well. So these sort of international actors are considered as a primary actor in the discipline of international relations or the subject matter of international relations. So their interaction, we referring, or their interactions we understand as a discipline of international relations or world politics. So friends, in that sense, if you consider that the state are the primary actor, the state are the core actor in the discipline of international relations. So why state interact with the other state in the nation state system? What are the fundamental nature? What are the basic objective of the state to interact in the international system, or with the other state in the international system? Friend, in that sense, as we discuss while we are discussing the basic nature of international relations, that the state interact with the rest of the state in the nation state system because to fulfill certain interest, and that interest we called as the concept of national interest. So friends, there are certain obligations, there are certain objective of the state, objective of the state towards their citizens. So that objective, or that interest of the state, we called as the concept of national interest. And friends, in order to achieve that sort of interest, there are various means to achieve that sort of interest of the nation, that is the national interest. One of the means is the conception of national power, or the power of that particular nation. So the various theorists of international relations, they talk about the national interest is equal to national power. So national power is a kind of means, national power is also kind of ends. To achieve that sort of interest, that is national interest, the national power is a very detrimental or the very important kind of issue, or a kind of means to achieve the concept, to achieve the concept of national interest or the objective of the national interest. And in addition to that, as we know, that as we discuss also here, is that the power, the concept of power, or the national power or the state capacity, is a very important kind of determinants that decide the capacity of the state in order to achieve its own national interest. So that conception of power is very important so far as the study, or so far as the discipline of international relation is concerned. So here we can make out a very famous statement given by Morgenthau, that the international relation is a kind of struggle for power among the nations in the international system. So that conception of the constant struggle for power by the state is the very important conception that it referring the concept of national power. So that power, the element of power, is very important so far as the conception of international relation, or the discipline of international relation is concerned. So in that sense, how to manage power, how to manage or regulate power. So in that sense, that the two important concepts that are there to discuss is the concept of balance of power and the concept of collective security. So friends, in that sense, in addition to that, there are various other important issues as well, other important core concept as well in the discipline of international relation. So these issues are again considered as a kind of fundamental or a kind of core conception in the discipline of international relations. So friend, in these one or two classes, we will discuss thoroughly about these basic concepts, the concept of national power, the concept of national interest, a concept of balance of power, and the concept of collective security. So friends, in this class, we will discuss about the concept of national interest, and then we will go for another important concept, that is the national power, and then we will discuss the concept of balance of power and collective security. So friends, in that class, in this particular class, that we will discuss about the concept of national interest. So in that sense, in that process, we would like to discuss about the understanding or the basic conception about the national interest, what exactly national interest is. And then we will discuss the various issues which are related to the conception or the core concept of international relations, that is the national interest. So in that sense, we will discuss the various classification of the concept of national interest, the various components of the national interest, and also the various methods of securing national interest by a particular nation. And then we will do the assessment, that is the conclusion about the concept of national interest, why that national interest is very much important so far as in the discussion or in the reading of international relations. So friend, in this particular lecture, we will discuss about the basic concept of international relations, that is national interest. So friend, national interest, as we discussed, that the national interest is the very key concept or very important or fundamental concept in international relations. As we discussed, friend, that the international relations, it is about the interactions among the state in the international system. So it is the states that are the primary actor, and the state interact with the rest of the state in the international system. So friends, why state interact with the other state in the international system or in the nation state system, that we have already discussed in some previous classes related to the concept of international relations, why we study international relations and how we study international relations. Just a kind of refreshing our memory related to the basic conception of international relations, just to relate the concept or the discipline of international relations, and why in that process we will make out why that conception of national interest is very much important to study in the discipline of international relations. So friends, in international relations, we see a kind of state interactions with the other state in the nation state system. So the question is, why state interact with the other state in the nation state system? Friends, in that sense, we can recall our memory regarding the state, why the state is interacting with the other state in the nation state system. Friends, we know that the state has certain obligations to fulfill towards their own citizens, and also has a certain core objective to fulfill or to achieve or to maintain that sort of values or that sort of interest of the nations. For example, the protection of the sovereignty of the state, physical boundary of the states, and as well as the core values of that particular state, and also the interest of their citizens and the protection of their citizens. So these are certain important interest of the nations, and in order to fulfill that sort of interest, the state cannot live in isolation. Rather, the state has to interact with the other state in the nation state system. So friends, in that sense, we know that that state interacts. So there are certain objective, certain interest of the state, and in order to fulfill that sort of objective, state interact with the other state in the nation state system, and state interact with the other state system on the basis of certain principles. So that principles we called as the concept of foreign policy, and the interaction, that process we called as the concept of international study of international relations. And the basic objective of studying, or the basic objective of state interaction with the other state in the nation state system, because to protect and to maintain or to fulfill the basic objective of the basic interest of the state. So that we call as the concept of national interest. So these are the correlations between three important concepts in the discipline of international relations or in world politics, that the state are the primary actor, state interact with the other state in the nation state system just to fulfill certain objective, certain interest of the state that we call as the national interest. And to fulfill that sort of national interest, state must have certain power to fulfill that sort of national interest of the state. And the basic principles of these interactions among the state in the nation state system that we called as the concept, these principles we called as, or that referred as the concept of foreign policy. So these are the basic core conception in international relations, and these are the basic correlation between three important key concept within the discipline of international relations. Friends, we also can make out here or recall that the state system, the realistic conception or the realistic perspective, one of the perspective or approach to understand or to explain the basic nature of the international relations, that the state interact in the international system, and that international system is what it is. It is a kind of anarchy that prevail in the international system. So friends, in that sense, the cooperative way to interact the state in the nation state system, or the conflicting way to interact the state in the international system, there are certain objective, and to fulfill that sort of objective, these are the basic philosophy, or these are the basic objective of the state, and that we call as the concept of national interest. So because of that reason, friends, we can make out that the issue or the concept of national interest is very much important, very much fundamental, very much core in the discipline of international relations. So friends, in that sense, we can easily understand that why national interest is important in the discipline of international relations. Now friends, the question is what exactly national interest is. That is what is the national interest, and how we can define, how we can understand the concept of national interest. So friends, in that sense, we can say that the national interest, the application of this concept of national interest is vary from nation to nations, policymakers to policymakers, statecraft to statecraft. So there is no any sort of core conception or any sort of defined conceptions about the definition or the understanding of the concept of national interest. For example, any state intervention in other state, for example, the former USSR intervention in the Afghanistan in 1979 up to 1989, and also the American invasion or American intervention in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and some other part of the world as well, for example Vietnam, some other sort of instances we have the example of that. At the same time, friends, the Hitler or any sort of dictatorial tendency of, like for example, in the case of Germany, that the German expansionist kind of policy, and also that the concept of imperialism and colonialism. So these sort of things, the nations argued that these are the basic conception, or that argument, they have the argument that these are the core interest or the national interest of the nations, and the state behave, a particular state behave or act in a particular way just to defend their own national interest. So what we are trying to make out here, the point is that the conception, or we can say the basic application of the concept of national interest vary from one state to other state, one issue to other issue, and one policy makers to another policy makers. But at the same time, there are various, so which means that the concept of national interest is very vague and very ambiguous in nature. So the definition or to defining the concept of national interest is very much difficult. But at the same time, there are various scholars of international relations. They trying to define, or they're trying to conceptualize the concept of national interest. So which means that one of the important international theories, that is Morgenthau, he defined international relations in a way that the national interest is what the national interest is referring a kind of national interest is like a kind of survival. So that means the meaning of national interest is survival, which means that the protection of the physical, political and cultural identity against the encroachment by other nation state. So the Marganto trying to define national interest in terms of survival of the state. So that survival is what? That survival in terms of protection or the capacity of the state or the basic objective of the state to protect its physical boundary as well as the political cultural identity of that particular state against any sort of encroachment or interference by the other state in the nation state system. Another important definitions given by Vernon von Dijk is that the national interest is that the state seeks to protect or achieve in relation to other state or to each other, which means that the national interest is what? The national interest is basically referring the state in interest or the state intention to protect its own kind of sovereignty or its own kind of security and survival against the other state in the nation state system. Another important definitions given by a very important think tanks based in the United States of America, that the Brookings Institution. So the national interest according to Brookings Institution is what a nation feels to be necessary to its security and well-being. National interest reflects the general and continuing ends for which a nation acts. So these are the various definitions, conceptual aspect in order to define the concept of national interest. So friend, in that sense, we understand how diverse is a particular concept of international relations, that is the national interest. So friends, national interest can be defined as in a very simplistic way with the help of certain arguments of the definitions given the various policymakers or also the research institutions and political thinkers, international theorists also. According to their point of view, we can summarize the concept of national interest, that the national interest can be defined as the claim, objective, goals, demands and interests which a nation always try to preserve, protect, defend and secure in relations with other nation. So this is the basic definition or the conception of national interest, which means that it is what? It is the objective of the state, goal of the state, interest of the state, demands of the state, and that demands, interest, objective and goals the state trying to preserve or maintain or protect. So that we call as the concept of national interest. So as we discussed that why state interact is in the nation state system, the state interact in the nation state system or with other state or other agencies or other international organizations or international actors. State interact with these sort of institutions or actors, international actors, just to protect and just to promote the national interest of that particular nation, and that national interest expressed in terms of objective of the state, aspiration of the state, demands of the state, goals of the state in the nation state system. And friends, the national interest is often used to guide the foreign policy of a country, as it provides a framework for determining which action and decision are in the best interest of that particular nation, which means that as we discussed that in the initial discussion of this particular topic, that why national interest is that as a concept is very much important so far as the in the domain of foreign policy making is concerned or in the discipline of international relations is concerned. So friends, here we can make out a point that the national interest is very much fundamental so far as the policy implementation, policy formulations and policy making is concerned. So the foreign policy of a country is always guided by the issue of national interest. Rather, it is the basis. The international interest is actually the basic basis or the fundamental so far as the policy making of a particular nation is concerned. The friends, national interest can be influenced. In addition to that, the national interest can be influenced by a variety of factors, including economic considerations, national security, and the promotion of values such as democracy, human rights. Different government and political actors may have different views on what constitute the national interest, and the national interest can change over time as a country's circumstances and priorities change. So, which means that the national interest is what? The national interest in the formulation or in the conceptualization of the concept of national interest in the discipline of international relations. That national interest are having the various components, or there are various elements or factors, while the national interest is finalized by the policy makers of that particular state. That the national interests are determined by various factors. That factors vary from vary from economic to political to geographical considerations, national powers, and also the circumstances. And so there are various factors, the various determinants are that constitute the basic conception or the basic formulation of national interest. So we will discuss that sort of issue in the later on in this particular lecture. And at the same time, from this definition or this explanation, we can make out that the national interest is dynamic in nature. So that dynamism of the basic nature of international relations, which means that according to the situation, according to time, according to the prevalent circumstances, national interest also got changed in accordingly. So that is also one of the important natures of the issue of national interest, or issue of national interest, or the basic conception of national interest. So friends, from up to now, we discussed about the basic understanding about the national interest, the issue of national interest, why national interest is very much important so far as the discipline of international relations and foreign policy is concerned. Now friends, we can discuss the basic components of national interest, what actually constitute the basic nature or the basic conception of national interest. So friends, we can make out that there are two important components of national interest. One is the necessary or very vital components of national interest, and another is the variable or non-vital components of national interest. According to Morgenthau, friends, the components necessary, that is the vital components, are the components necessary for survival or identity of a nation are termed as vital components. According to Morgenthau, Morgenthau explained that the necessary or vital components are those interests which are very fundamental so far as that particular nation is concerned. So he subdivides the identity into three parts. One is the cultural, another is the political and physical. So cultural identity consists of historical values that are upheld by a nation as part of its cultural heritage, and the physical identity is defined as territorial identity, and the political identity means the political economic system. Survival is a vital component of foreign policy. To achieve these, that is the survival, a state can even go to war. So in that sense, those interests or objective of the nation, which are very fundamental, which are very core to that particular state or the nation, that Morgenthau called as a kind of vital components or the necessary components of the national interest. So which means that certain interest of the nation, that is the national interest, are very necessary in nature, and also it is very static in nature. It is not got changed, and it is a generalized conception or the generalized kind of components that are equally applicable to all states in the nation state system. So the security of the nation, the survival of the nation, physical protection of the physical boundary of the nation, and also the cultural heritage and the economic components of that particular state, or the economic interest of that particular state, these are unchangeable. The state not compromise that sort of interest of the nations, and to protect that sort of interest, state even can also go for war. So accordingly we can make out here is that these sort of interests are very fundamental, core in nature. So that sort of interest is called as or referred as a kind of necessary or vital components of national interest. So another important, friends, components of the national interest is the variable and non vital components of national interest. So the variables are, that is the dynamic in nature, and it's vary from time to time, and also from the policy makers to policy makers and the party in the ruling party of that particular state, and also the situational factors also impacting the basic objective of the nation, or the national interest of that particular nation. So the situational factor, these components are dependent on circumstances. They are determined by factors such as decision makers, public opinion, party politics, section or the group interest, and political and moral factors as well. These are the objective that the state would like to see them fulfilled, but they will not go to war to fulfill that sort of interest, which means that it is again a very important national interest or the interest of that particular nation, but it is not as important as in the case of the vital components or the non-variable components of the national interest. So in that sense, the state wish to fulfill that sort of interest, but state will not go to war and that sort of violence and that sort of kind of war like situation to defend that sort of national interest, which is non-vital in nature. So these are economic some tertiary economic interest, and also some moral issues and some other political issues which are less important compared to the vital components of the national interest. So in combination of that two factors or that two components, we can call as the two important components of the national interest. One is vital in nature, another is non-vital in nature or non-vital components of the national interest. Friends, another important thing that we need to discuss so far as the issue or the concept of national interest in international relation is that the classification of national interest means the various kinds of the classification of national interest. So as your friend discussed that there are two important components of the national interest. One are vital in nature, another are non-vital in nature. To make more easy to understand these sort of vital and non-vital components of the national interest, one of the important international relation theorist or the Thomas Robinson, he classified there are 6 types of classification or the 6 kinds of national interest, just to understand these vital and non-vital components of national interest. So one important components or the one important kinds or the classification of national interest is the primary interest, another is the secondary interest, third is the permanent interest, and next is the variable interest, and another important components or another important classification of national interest is the general interest, and finally is the specific interest. So the primary interest is referring that the primary interest, these are the interests that no state will even compromise on. For example, the very vital components, we can give the example of that. For example, the physical boundaries of the protection of the physical boundary of the state, the sovereignty of the state, security of the state, survival of the state. These are the important kind of interest of the nation. So it is very primary, very core, and very fundamental in nature. So they are securing political, cultural, and physical identity of the nations. These are the example just to make it understandable, more understandable so far as the basic nature of the primary interest of the one of the important classification of the national interest. The secondary interest that refer that they are less significant compared to the primary interest, and it includes protecting citizens staying in abroad and ensuring diplomatic immunities for diplomatic staffs. So for example, the citizens living in abroad and the diplomat employed in other states as well, in foreign states. So the protection to their interest in abroad, this is also equally important for a particular state. But these interests compared to the primary interest, that is the security survival of that particular state, that secondary state are less important in nature. So that we call as the secondary interest of that particular state. Another important classification is the permanent interest, which are non-changeable. It is permanent in nature, it is not dynamic in nature. So they are the long interest of the states. For example, China's interest to preserve its hegemony in the South Asian region. So one of the example we can cite here, and some other examples we also can cite, that how long-term interests are to that particular state, and state trying to preserve it, and it is also a permanent in nature. For example, we can also take the example of India as well. India wants to see a kind of nation state system or world affair or international relations based on more democratic, transparent and equal participant basis. And also India wants to make international relations more global in nature, more inclusive in nature. So that these are the permanent interest of of India. So we can make it that it is India's permanent interest in the international system. Another important classification of national interest is the variable interest that vary from time to time, situation to situation, circumstances to circumstances. Also the party politics and some other factors also influencing in making the national interest or in deciding or defining the national interest of that particular state. So these interests are, that is the variable interest, depends on the circumstances and can sometimes bypass primary and permanent interest as well. Another important classification of national interest is the general interest, and we also can call this is the national interest, international interest or general interest, which is applicable to all nations in the nation state system. So these interests apply to a large number of the nation. For example, international peace, for example, food security, environmental protections, and also the healthcare system. So and also the economic development, economic prosperity, international economic prosperity. So that is equally applicable to all nations in the nation state system. So that we call as the international interest, or we also call as the general kind of interest. Another, the last important classification of national interest is the specific interest, means a very specific kind of interest, and these interests suit particular nations only. For example, right to development of the third world countries, for example, non-alignment movement, for example, inclusive multilateralism. So this sort of interest is not global in nature as compared to general interest. Rather, some sort of interests are there which are very much important for a particular region, for a particular group of nations, or for particular nations as well. So that we call as the concept or classification, one of the classification of national interest, that is the specific interest. So these are the important classification, these are the important kinds or the dimension of national interest in the discipline of international relations. Now friends, how to achieve that? As we have already discussed about the basic conception of national interest, and we also discussed about the various components of the national interest, and also the various classification of national interest. So we can understand, we can summarize the discussions that the national interest is a very important concept in the discipline of international relations, and also in the domain of formulation of foreign policy, and also the implementation of foreign policy. So the important questions now arise from here is that how to achieve that national interest, what nations have to do so far as to achieve that particular interest of that particular nation. So that we also called as the methods for securing national interest. So one of the way to secure national interest is the process of diplomacy or the means of diplomacy. Another is the propaganda, economic means through alliances and treaties, and also coercive means also can be deployed so far as to achieve the national interest of that particular nation. So the nations, one of the means to achieve that national interest is the process or the means of diplomacy or channel of diplomacy. So diplomacy is referring what? Diplomacy is referring a kind of application or the process of communications between the state to other state or among the state through the officially appointed individual or the officer that we call as the diplomats. So the diplomacy is what? Diplomacy is a channel of communications. Through that communications, negotiations, dialogue, discussions, through the officially appointed officers of the state, that is the diplomats, the nations trying to pursue a nation trying to protect the national interest in international affairs. Another important means to achieve national interest is the propaganda. So the propaganda is another important means to achieve a kind of national interest by the state, that the state trying to propagate and make the propaganda about a particular issues, and through that the state trying to achieve that sort of thing. So in that context, friends, the Cold War politics, the propaganda sort of politics also there, the state use as a kind of strategy to achieve the national interest of a particular nation. Another means to achieve national interest is the economic means. Through economic means, state also can achieve a kind of national interest as well. For example, you can take the example of United States of America. We also can take the example of former USSR, and in the present situations also, China also involved in the nation state system by giving various sort of means, economic means, through that the state is trying to achieve national interest. So for example, the China economic corridor is one of the example of it, and also the various economic benefits or the economic packages, economic aid and assistance given by the major powers or the superpower in the past. These are the various economic means through that the concept of national interest can be, or the issue of national interest can be achieved by a particular nations as well. And here also, friends, some other important means to achieve national interest is that the alliances and the treaties. So the various alliances state make it just to achieve the national interest of that particular nations. So alliances, for example, friends, during the Cold War period, we see a kind of alliances between the two superpower, that is the USA and former USSR, Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. And then after, we also have the non-alignment movement, and also BRICS, for example, SCO, G20, so NATO, Warsaw Pact. These are the alliances and the treaties. Through that example of the alliances and treaties, through that the state trying to achieve the national interest of that particular nation. Friends, another important kind of means to achieve the national interest is the coercive means as well, which means that we have the international organization. The international organization, for example, United Nations, it has the mandate that through discussions, negotiations, peaceful settlement of the dispute, the state must adopt that sort of peaceful means to achieve or to sort out the conflict among the state. But at the same time, we also have the international law, and also the UN Charter talks about also allowing the state to use coercive means as well, just to defend or just to achieve its own interest, for example, the survival of the state and the security of that particular state. So there are various provisions that allow to the state to go or to have coercive means to achieve the national interest. So use of force is allowed in the international law as well as in the United Nations Charter, that the state can use force to fulfill its own legitimate objective or the legitimate interest of that particular nation. So friends, in that sense, we can say that the coercive means is also one of the way to achieve the concept of national interest. So friends, in this particular lecture about the concept of national interest, we discuss about the basic understanding or the basic concept of national interest. We also, friends, discuss about the various components of the national interest, and the various classification of the national interest. And we also discuss that why national interest is very much important, so far as to discuss, or so far as to know in the discipline, so far as to discuss the concept of national interest in the international system. So in that sense, friends, we can say that the national interest is very important components, is a very important core values in the discipline of international relations, and this is the basic, very basic objective of the state. And because of that reason, state trying to interact with the other nations or with the other actors in the international system. So that makes a kind of importance of that particular topic, that is the national interest in the discipline of world affairs or in the discipline of international politics. So friends, thank you very much. This is about the concept of national interest as an important or fundamental concept in the discipline of international relations. Now friends, we will discuss another important topics which is related to international relations, that is the issue of national power in the discipline of international relations. Thank you very much.